Hello, thank you for joining us today. Our goal over the next 45 minutes is to help inform and equip you with the policy changes affecting private sponsorship that were recently announced by President Trump's administration and what steps you can take now to support your sponsorship applications. My name is Krista Kartzen, and I'm the Senior Director for Sponsorship Initiatives with Welcome.us. I'm also a sponsor, which means I know how eager you all are to get to the heart of why you've joined today. So we'll jump right in. As you know, the new administration signed 2 executive orders on January 20th that affect sponsorship programs, namely the humanitarian parole processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, and the Welcome Corps. We'll provide an analysis of these executive orders and how sponsors and newcomers are affected. We'll also have time for a live and candid Q&A and equip you with practical next steps, whether you've welcomed a newcomer or are still waiting on a pending application. We want to recognize there were other policies announced that affect immigration other than sponsorship, but in this webinar, we will not address policy changes outside of those that impact private sponsorship programs. Before we dive in, I want to note that you'll hear the phrases welcome.us and the Welcome Corps, and I want to provide brief context for clarity. This event is hosted by Welcome.us, and we are a nonprofit, non-government organization founded to equip and empower Americans to participate in the work of welcoming newcomers primarily through sponsorship. The Welcome Corps is a U.S. federal government program that enables Americans to sponsor refugees. Welcome.us is not a decision maker about these policies, and we are not the administrator of the sponsorship programs, so we cannot make decisions on specific cases. This is the work of the US government, in this case, the State Department, now led by the new administration. The content of our webinar is not being shared, it's not being shared on behalf of the Welcome Corps program or other government programs. What we at Welcome.us hope to do is to be a trusted source of information about what is happening, how you and the people you hoped to welcome may be impacted, and what steps you can take now. So please share your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll try our best to answer what we can today. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on our policy page, along with the continued program updates as we have them. So to share what we know, we are joined today by Welcome.us CEO Nazanin Ash and our co-founder and co-chair Cecilia Munoz. Nazanin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Krista. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for the care and concern you're expressing on behalf of people that you've welcomed or that you hope to welcome. We've heard from many of you just over the last 24 to 48 hours. And we hope that this webinar is useful to you and is the beginning of how we support each other on behalf of the people that we hoped to welcome. It's a really confusing time, and the changes are happening very quickly, and they impact people that you love and that you care about and that you hoped to welcome to safety. We're really eager to support you and to make sure that you know that you're not alone in your care and concern. I think it's amazing, as Krista talked about, that 7,000 of you signed up for this webinar. There are over 2 million people who are currently serving as sponsors. They are in 12,000 zip codes across all 50 states. And the work that they've done to bring refugee newcomers to safety has been life-saving and life-changing for newcomers, but also deeply meaningful and enriching for sponsors and the communities that have welcomed them. So what you are doing is beautiful, it's important, it is deeply impactful for people in need of urgent safety, and we want to support you as much as we can to fulfill what you hoped to do as sponsors and welcomers. As Krista noted at the top, these programs are changing rapidly. Since the executive orders were signed on Monday, there's a lot that we know, but there's a lot about how the policies will actually take shape that we're still learning. The situation is changing day by day, and we intend to be as honest with you as we can possibly be about what's clear and what we don't yet know. And what I mean by being honest with you is we'll share everything that we know, but we'll be clear about what we don't know. We value your trust, we value your time. So keep coming back to us because we'll share more information as we have it. Okay, let's dive into what we know is happening with the various sponsorship programs, the three that we're going to focus on today, which are the three sponsorship programs that exist or have existed. First, I want to talk about the private sponsorship program known as the Process for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, or what we have referred to as the P for CHNV program. Like the Uniting for Ukraine program that I'll talk about next, P for CHNV has allowed American sponsors to bring people who were in danger in these countries to safety in the United States. Sponsors submitted applications with the names of the people they hope to sponsor. The U.S. government conducted security and background checks on both the sponsors and refugee newcomer before approving the application and issuing a humanitarian visa and work authorization good for up to 2 years. And then sponsors met those individuals at the airport, helped them find housing and employment, and helped them in many cases to apply for more durable status so that they could continue to stay in the United States and rebuild their work here after the end of their initial humanitarian visa period. The reason these visas were issued temporarily, those temporary humanitarian visas, is because these are people coming from countries like Ukraine or like with the Afghan evacuation, where people were in urgent need of safety. And so the temporary humanitarian visa is a way for people to be able to come because they urgently need safety. And then once here, they can apply for more durable status. The administration has announced an end to the P4CH&V program. That means Americans cannot submit new applications to sponsor individuals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, or Venezuela for people who are fleeing violence and persecution. But it's unclear right now whether the new administration will continue to process the applications Americans have already submitted. There have not been any explicit statements made about whether current submitted applications will continue to be processed. So, as we will talk about later today, it's very important that you follow up on your case if you're a sponsor who has an application in process for the P4CH&V program. I want to talk next about the Uniting for Ukraine program. The executive order that announced the end to P4CH&V did not include specific announcements regarding Uniting for Ukraine. So we know of no new changes to the Uniting for Ukraine program at this point in time. The website and the application portal remain open. So we encourage people to continue to submit applications, though we have noticed that application processing for this program has slowed significantly. We've heard that sponsors have been waiting for as much as 6 to 12 months for their Uniting for Ukraine case to be reviewed. So while we know that this program hasn't right now been affected by the executive order, the pathway has slowed significantly since the program was first started. Next, I'm going to talk about the executive order that affects the United States Refugee Resettlement Program and the private sponsorship program under the United States Refugee Resettlement Program, known as the Welcome Corps. Under the executive order that the new administration issued, the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program is paused until further notice, pending a review by the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security and a decision by the President to resume the program. Because the Welcome Corps is a U.S. refugee, is a program under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, it is affected by this pause. That means that refugee arrivals to the United States have been suspended. Previously scheduled travel of refugees to the United States is being canceled, and no new travel will be scheduled during the period of the suspension. We also understand the Welcome Corps is not accepting new applications at this time, and the processing of existing applications are paused. There are two exceptions to the pause for the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and the Welcome Corps program under it. The first is for people who are applying under the Special Immigrant Visa Program, which is a refugee program for people who are in danger because they assisted U.S. troops or U.S. organizations. There are, for example, many Afghan refugees who are awaiting processing and admission to the United States for special immigrant visas. The administration has said that this program will continue during the pause, and that's in no small measure to the powerful advocacy that we've seen from the veteran community. The second exception is that the executive order notes that exceptions will be made on a case-by-case basis for other refugees that are currently in process under the Refugee Admissions Program. So again, as we'll talk about later, we want to give you information to help you ask for that case-by-case review and to advocate on behalf of the case that you've submitted such that it be potentially considered for one of these exceptions. We also want to make sure that everyone hears loud and clear that refugees that have already arrived to the United States through the Welcome Corps are not impacted by these changes. Refugee status is a status that is a permanent status in the United States. Refugees who have already arrived to the United States can still apply for permanent residency after they've been living in the United States for 1 year, and they are still eligible to apply for citizenship after 5 years. We know of no new policy changes that impact refugees' ability to apply for that status after they have arrived to the United States. So if refugees have already arrived, they've not been impacted by any of these policy changes. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about why these programs are being paused. In large measure, we should understand these programs to be paused because the incoming administration is undertaking a review of all of our immigration pathways. So, as Krista noted at the top, there have been many immigration executive orders that have been issued, And the cumulative impact of those executive orders is that nearly all pathways, except for some few exceptions, nearly all immigration pathways to the United States are being paused for review. And the administration has noted in the executive order for the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program that this program is going to be reviewed for how it's conducted, for whether it needs any process improvements, for whether refugees have been received and integrated well, whether communities have been embracing of the newcomers that have been welcomed through the program. They want to make certain that these programs are working well for the communities that are receiving them and that it's beneficial for our country. And for that reason, we're deeply encouraged about the future of these programs. These programs are safe, they are legal, they are orderly, they are planned. We know that they've made a tremendous impact in the communities that have received that. We know that because we hear directly from community members and from welcomers, and from state and local leaders in those communities. Sponsors talk about how welcoming newcomers through these safe, orderly, legal pathways has brought their communities together, has increased understanding and a sense of belonging and connection, and has enabled them to extend the best of who we are as Americans and the best of what we have to offer as America to a new generation of Americans who are seeking safety and opportunity here. We hear from political leaders, state and local leaders from both parties, whether it's Republican governors, whether it's Republican mayors, whether it is Democratic mayors and the heads of the chambers of commerce. These programs are apolitical, which is to say that they're embraced by so many Americans in every corner of the country, including so many of our elected leaders. And it's really important that as the administration undertakes a review of these programs, they hear about the support and the effectiveness of these programs and the willingness of our communities to help welcome and indeed sponsor refugees with their own time and resources. You are all part of a program that, again, already 2 million sponsors have taken part. They have dedicated 7 billion of their own time and resources to help serve as the friends, the guides, the case managers as newcomers make their way in our communities. And those newcomers are estimated to contribute $9 trillion to our economy over the next decade. These are the programs that Americans support. And if we go to the next slide, you get a little bit of insight into the support that's there. This is data based on a research that our partner More in Common did very recently, just after the election. And what it finds is that 93% of Americans think that we have a problem at our border that needs resolution. That's very consistent with what you hear from the new administration. They're trying to understand what that problem is. They're trying to respond to this desire for a more managed immigration system. The other side of this is that 73% of Americans think we should have increased safe and orderly and legal pathways for people seeking safety and opportunity to come to the United States. So there's a super majority of Americans that support these types of programs that we've been talking about. They're directly responsive to what Americans of every political stripe and in every corner of the country have said they want. And you're all a part of that. And we're very hopeful that once these reviews are conducted, these are exactly the types of programs that'll be resumed. But you are all a really important part of ensuring that that happens. So I'm now going to turn it over to Cecilia, who, in addition to being the co-founder and co-chair of Welcome.us's board, is a longtime national leader and policymaker with over 30 years of experience in some of these most thorny issues, including 5 years leading the White House Domestic Policy Council. She has seen a lot and she's got a lot of wisdom to share with us. And I think it could be really valuable, Cecilia, for our audience today to hear about the policy making process and how they can help make a difference as the administration is conducting these reviews to encourage the resumption of these programs and the opportunities for the people they hoped to welcome to come to the United States.
Thank you so much, Nazanin. And we're really quite moved to see so many of you participating in this call. This is not an easy time. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, and as you heard, a lot that we still don't know. But this team at Welcome.us is going to continue to provide you with accurate information. We're going to be as clear as we can be on what we do and don't know. So I hope you will stay in touch with us, stay connected with us, because as things change, we're going to continue to keep you informed. So here's one thing we do know, and that is that literally millions of Americans have stepped forward to sponsor people because there was a need and because they had an opportunity to do it, which says a huge amount about our capacity as a country, and about who we are as people who care about our neighbors. That is a tremendously powerful thing. Everybody on this call is part of that. That's why you're here. As you heard Nazanin explain, the administration has pressed pause on these programs and is assessing, right? So their radar is going, and policymakers in general are now in a period of assessing. So what does it mean that we have paused these things? What is the impact of that? And what are as policymakers do, what are the pros and cons of the various programs? Everyone on this call is connected to these programs. And at a moment where there are a lot of headlines right now, the airwaves are crowded with news, a lot of that feels distant and theoretical to people. For the people on this call, this is not theoretical. I've been looking at the questions as we've been speaking. There are a lot of them. Every single one of them reflects a story, reflects people that you are connected to. These are really, really compelling stories. And making them tangible and visible to our neighbors, to our communities, to our sponsorship groups, to our policymakers, the kinds of folks that you saw on the previous slide, your congressional representatives, your mayors, as well as community leaders, is really important for moving this from a theoretical issue that's in headlines to something that very clearly, very tangibly affects people, affects you, and affects people that you care about. And especially in a time when policies have been paused, what that means is that it's an opportunity for policymakers to listen and understand what the impact of these policies is, and also what the impact is of the pause and what the impact would be if the policies were not to continue. So that makes this a very powerful moment, a very powerful time. And it makes the information that you have and the stories that you have to tell about the people that you care about and about yourselves as welcomers. This is an incredibly important time to bring that information forward. We're going to provide you with some tools that will help you do that in just a moment. But I just want to tell you, as a former policymaker myself, listening is a big piece of their work, and understanding what's working and what's not working and how it affects actual humans is tremendously powerful. This is a powerful moment, and this network of people has important stories to tell, and telling them matters greatly. And so with that, let me stop and then hand the microphone back.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And one of the ways that we can now, as sponsors, help inform our policymakers as they understand what works and what doesn't work, is to contact them, to share what's been working, what hasn't been working, and then share with your sponsor team, because one voice can make a difference and multiple voices can make a bigger difference. So contact your representative, get together with your sponsor group, with your closest community, to share what you've done, to share your story with them and with your representatives, and then come back and tell us about your experience. You'll hear later in our time together, there are different ways that you could do this. But first and foremost, I'd love to open a guide that we just recently created for you to do just this. We created this guide in response to sponsor inquiries about how to check the status of or raise questions about a pending case. You can access it on our website. There's a link in the chat. But even in the last couple of days, it's been, this is an avenue now that you can not only check on the status of your case, but also express your support, express what's working for you and your community about these programs. So once you go ahead on our website and click on the link, it will open a Google Doc, which you'll see it is divided into two sections. Section 1 is for sponsors who have a pending case right now, whether it's CHNV, U4U, or the Welcome Corps. And then that is to express a particular case, ask about the status, ask about if there's any way to troubleshoot that status on a case-by-case basis. And then section 2 is for sponsors. If you have a story, if you've connected with newcomers in your community and you care about private sponsorship programs, this is our opportunity in the next 90 days to express that to our representatives. And this guide will go step by step. We'll just explore a little bit more in that first category of, because we recognize most of you on the call are waiting for a response after you've submitted an application. And so this is what you can do to raise your specific case to your representatives. You click on the link that says, click here if you're a Welcome Corps sponsor, if you're a humanitarian parole sponsor, and you're seeking to contact your representative. This page will come up on your screen. You'll type in your name and address. I just used my postal code for my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio for this demo. You'll click Next on the screen, and it will take you to an automated pre-populated template. It will also identify your representatives and already have their contact information pre-populated for you. You can edit anything about this message. If you want to express your story, this is your opportunity to do that. If you want to share your specific case number, you can do that here as well. And once you hit send, this will go directly to your federal representative's national office. This is like an email. They'll just get an email that expresses your concern, your support, your story directly to them. And then if you're specifically looking to raise a question about a specific case, the guide further explains that you should also go back and contact their local office. So this particular form goes directly to their national office. That's the policy-making wheelhouse of where policies are happening. But the local office will also include constituency services. And the guide walks you through, how do you get in touch with your constituency services? How do you submit a specific case form that they're going to ask you about? And then it advises you to follow up. because now you've created a relationship with you and your local constituency services office, and you have that opportunity to continue to follow up on your case, continue to let them know that you care, because I know that you all do. So I'm not usually one to advocate. I just want to take a step back. This might be new information for a lot of you. I didn't know before I started this work that constituency services had a specific inquiry that you could actually ask about cases like this. This is new information for me as we're learning together. But I've really come to understand after speaking with Cecilia and Nazanin, and honestly, after speaking with a lot of sponsors like you who have actually done this already, I'm learning myself, and we want to share what we're learning. And so as Cecilia said, these efforts really do make a difference. And I'd say especially in these next 90 days, as these programs are being actively assessed. So we're going to turn now to our time of Q&A. If you have questions about contacting your representatives, this is the time, or anything we've covered so far, truly, please put it in the Q&A function. And we're going to start off with a couple of the more common questions that we've received from sponsors in advance of our call, starting with one on the Welcome Corps. Nazanin, can you help us understand what does the executive order mean when it talks about a case-by-case exception process? Will some refugees still arrive during the suspension period? And can Welcome Corps sponsors submit their applications for consideration with this exception process?
I saw that question come up so many times among the questions that people have been submitting. So again, I'm going to be super clear about what we know and super clear about what we don't know. So what we can share is that the executive order does say that there will be an exception on a case-by-case basis as determined jointly by the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security. What hasn't been defined yet is a clear process or criteria for what cases will be evaluated for an exception. I think the best thing sponsors can do right now is exactly what Krista outlined, and contacting your federal representatives, submitting your case information, and letting them know how important this case is to you and your community. Because all we know is that there will be no arrivals during the suspension period, except on a case-by-case basis, and for special immigrant visa holders, as we described. And as you heard Cecilia talking about, squeaky wheels get grease. So be a squeaky wheel on behalf of your case. We don't know anything about the criteria that will be considered, but what we hope is that what you share, the stories you share, will help inform those criteria. I see some of you asking in the chat, what about family reunification cases? What about, SIV cases that were part of my Welcome Corps application? Policymakers are building out the answers to the criteria now, and you can help them do that by sharing your story and sharing the reasons why you think these cases should be considered for exceptions. And your congressional representatives, it's part of their responsibilities to ask those questions and advocate on your behalf with the federal agencies that they oversee.
Thank you, Nazanin. This next question's for Cecilia. This is what if half the family in my humanitarian parole case has received travel authorization and half is pending? We've heard this from U4U and CHNV cases. What should they do in that case?
There isn't a clear procedure for this kind of situation outlined by the government. So this is a great example, and I saw lots of other good examples among the Q&A, where contacting your federal representative and explaining the situation can be really, really helpful for troubleshooting your case, right? So the more they understand, we're in a situation where there's a family in question and half have received authorization and half haven't. That's really compelling. And that's the kind of thing we want your representatives to know, because they can then give feedback as the government is figuring out how people are affected and what their processes are going to be. So this is why it's so important for policymakers to understand the kinds of circumstances that you all and the people you care about are experiencing. So really, the materials that help you contact your representatives are really important for troubleshooting problems exactly like this one.
Thank you. And as our panelists alluded, you've all shared really great questions in the live Q&A function. So we've selected a few of those to tee up next for our speakers. One of your questions is, will the links that we're receiving in the chat, will we receive those in an email? And yes, you will receive a follow-up email after the webinar with resources, including all of the links that are in the chat now. So our first question for our panelists is, I heard the pause to the U.S. refugee admissions program and the Welcome Corps is supposed to start on January 27th. Is that no longer the case?
It is no longer the case. The executive order included the January 27th date, but we woke up this morning to a memo from the State Department stating that they were pausing all travel effective immediately. So the pause is in effect.
Thank you. We had a next question says, I understand that all flights that were scheduled for refugees coming in through US RAP and the Welcome Corps have been canceled and no new flights will be scheduled. Can I arrange and pay for flights myself?
The tough part here is no, because the intention of the policy is to pause refugee arrivals. So it's not so much about who pays for the flight. It's about giving the new administration, the new administration wants the time to evaluate the programs and evaluate the processes for the programs before they permit additional arrivals. So the refugee you hope to welcome wouldn't have authorization to arrive in the United States. That's authorization, that's the visa, that's the authorization that needs to be provided by the government. And they're not doing it right now during this pause. So arranging and paying for the flight on your own isn't an option, unfortunately.
We've had a few questions about Uniting for Ukraine. Folks are confused. Has that been paused as well?
The government has said nothing. The new administration has said nothing about Uniting for Ukraine. So our understanding is that the program is still operating, because they haven't said that it's not. But we do know that processing times have been slowed down considerably, and it's entirely possible that will continue to be true, or they may slow down even further. We just don't know right now about the future of the program, but they haven't said anything about it. And so as far as we know, it's operating, but it's slow.
And we're going to shift back to the Welcome Corps. We're getting a lot of questions specifically around the Welcome Corps. So the next few are about that. Does the suspension of US RAP and the Welcome Corps apply to refugees in all countries?
Yes, it does. So the pause applies to all applications to bring refugees into the United States through the Welcome Corps through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. The only exception that's been identified is for special immigrant visas. And then, as I said, those exceptions on a case-by-case basis, although we do not yet know if there will be any additional processes for special immigrant visas. And we do not yet know what the criteria will be for case-by-case exceptions, which is why, again, we're encouraging you to share your cases to help inform those criteria.
Thank you, Naz. I think you've answered the next question, but want to lift it up because one of the viewers today, their brother's travel authorization was canceled today, and they are asking if he has an exception because his travel was scheduled before the executive order.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There are no clear criteria for exceptions that we know of right now. But again, this is such an important story to lift up for your congressional representatives and to seek support from your congressional representatives. This is a really, this is a really important, these are really important stories to lift. And I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how devastating that news was for you and for your brother.
Thank you. We're going to take one final question. How do these program suspensions impact Afghan SIV applicants? You've talked about this program that's uniquely different. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yep. So the executive order issued by the new president doesn't on its face apply to special immigrant visa or SIV applicants. So Afghans processed as SIVs shouldn't be stopped from completing their consular processing and traveling to the US. And that's true for family members joining their Afghan or Iraqi SIV holder family members as well. So this is one of the exception areas that the executive order carved out specifically. So that's our understanding of what should happen.
Thank you, Cecilia. And just for everyone's awareness, we had originally planned for a 45-minute call. We're going to extend it by a few minutes because we wanted to fit in as many of those Q&A as we could today. But this will be recorded. If you have to hop off, you can come back to view the rest of this webinar. But really, we're going to wrap things up in just a few minutes. Nazanin, when we ended our last webinar together back in November, you ended on some of your words of advice. We'd love to hear today, what advice do you have for us now that we're facing these policy changes?
I'd love, consistent with some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat, don't give up. This is a pause. This is a review. I'm seeing questions about what we should do with funds that were raised to sponsor. Hold your funds until there's more information. The refugee admissions program is up for review in 90 days. So you don't need to take actions now different from raising up your stories and seeking those case-by-case exceptions and helping to inform the policy as it's being developed by the new administration. They are working out the policy. Right now, what we're working with is a pause with a window for case-by-case exceptions and special immigrant visa holders. So help inform the policy review. For those of you you've raised funds, like keep your donors up to date on what you're experiencing. You could even consider including them in your efforts to raise concerns with your federal representatives if you want to do that. Our intention here today was to tell you about what's happened, everything we know, and tell you what you can do about it. We've developed these tools that, Krista walked through to make it as easy as possible for you to engage your federal representatives and tell them the story of your case and help define the policy and the criteria that will guide the program in the future. Some of you asked in the chat, like, is the SIV program an exception because veterans have been such strong advocates? Yes, you can do the same. And we strongly encourage you to do that and to engage the rest of your sponsor group and any others that you think would join you in expressing the desire to welcome the people that you've been preparing to welcome. It will help shape the policy going forward. We're going to continue to be in deep solidarity with you. We have all of your questions that you've submitted. We're going to seek to be as responsive as possible and we want to hear from you too about what's helpful.
Thank you both so much. Like so many of you on the screen, I am a Welcome Corps sponsor that is waiting to welcome the case that we're sponsoring. I was matched with a family and I had to tell my sponsor group this week that we're not going to welcome them as quickly as we had hoped. So that was a really hard message to send. And I know a lot of you have had to have the same conversation this week. Nazanin, when we were debriefing this morning about when we heard the news that everything was paused, you asked me, had I welcomed the family yet? We touched base on that, and obviously not. And I said, I didn't, this wasn't the story I was hoping to tell. I had imagined, once we were matched, we found out more information about the family, the children, and there's an apartment today that's empty waiting for them. And I just said, this wasn't the story that I thought we were going to tell. But then we took a beat and I said, well, this isn't the end of the story. It's part of it now. But also now my representatives are going to hear about my story. And other people will too. Again, when we heard the news, I let them know, a staff member from my church said, is there anything we could do to help? Is there anything we could do to advocate for this family? I just said, yes, I think there is. And, the next thing I'm going to do after this webinar is send them our sponsor guide for contacting our federal representatives. I'm going to talk to my group. We're going to put together a plan, send a few emails, and get some folks to share our story because we want our federal representatives to hear about it. I think they're going to be, I hope they're going to be thankful to hear about it, about the generosity of American communities, about our commitment, alongside them to welcoming. And so this is an opportunity to share that commitment. We're going to go on to next steps because that first next step, just as I'm going to do, I just encourage you all to consider contacting your federal representatives, whether it's about a specific case or otherwise about your support for these programs. Stay updated. Visit our policy updates page because, as Cecilia noted, things have changed as quickly as today, and we updated that page today. So please continue to take a look at that. If you haven't subscribed to our emails, take a look at subscribing to those, and you'll be alerted of major changes. And then contact us. In the guide for contacting your federal representatives, there's an email there, sponsor@welcome.us. We want to hear about your experience contacting your federal representatives, and then we want to welcome you back on February 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern. We want to hear about your experience. We want to troubleshoot together. Let's talk about and debrief about your experience, what changes we want to see collectively, because we're really truly in this together. And we want to hear from you too, not just about your experience, but what is going to be helpful to you as we walk through these next 90 days and beyond together. We'd appreciate it if you could just take a moment to respond to the survey that's going to pop up on your screen once this webinar closes. And we take your feedback seriously. For those that have been on webinars on the past, I hope you see that we've incorporated more of your feedback in each session, delivering concise and candid content relevant to your needs, and we want to continue doing that. And again, please join our next session on February 6th to touch base on your efforts and how we could be helpful to you. On behalf of all of us at welcome.us, I know that it is your compassion and dedication to supporting newcomers that inspires us here every single day. Thank you, be well, and we'll see you soon.